Hey all, this is David Ducker coming back in today. I'm going to be talking about house rules, mass combat. It's for the big battles, or clash of armies, perhaps a battle involving 5 armies. Probably not. That's a little silly, but you certainly could engage in such silliness and foolishness if you wanted to, and sometimes you might want to, absolutely. But we're going to be talking about the mechanics. So I love mass combat. I've done at least one video just talking about how much I like it and why it's good to have some bigger plots that can only be resolved with very large groups of individuals, with hundreds of troops, of thousands of soldiers, with 10,000 battle droids perhaps. But I've already talked about why and narratively how. But let's talk about mechanically how to do it. So I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with different systems engaging in mass combat. I have used kind of a homebrew system with Pathfinder, and currently we're using Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones RPG, which has its own mass combat system. So I do have a little bit of experience, and I've played some Rogue Trader, which has mass combat to a degree, but not a huge amount of that. Now, some of that can still be useful, of course. But I'll start by talking about the Game of Thrones system, because it's probably the best that I've come across. So the mechanics of that system, basically you take each unit, and a unit is a collection of very similar troops. They all have basically like gambesons and longbows, and they're all grouped together. That's a unit of longbowmen, perhaps. Or if they all have panoply and hoplons and dories and Corinthian helms, and there's a whole bunch of them together, that's probably a unit of hoplites. But basically, in the Song of Ice and Fire, each unit is represented by a generic member of that unit. So for those hoplites, you just take one hoplite character sheet, who you think is the most average of all those hoplites, and he's going to represent that unit. So if we're coming up against, let's say, some satyrs, and the satyrs all have, let's say, wicker shields and hand axes. So there's a large group of them. So we'll make a unit of satyrs represented by the most generic satyr in that unit. In Song of Ice and Fire, each unit is 100 men or troops, but you certainly don't have to stick to this. So you have these two units, and they're going to come together, and they're going to clash. For the sake of simplicity, let's say they're coming head-on against each other. You can do mods if they're hitting the flank or the rear, but let's say they're coming head-on. So the benefit of this system is you're using the exact same combat mechanics as just two men fighting, or two women fighting, or a man and a woman fighting. And that will go poorly for the man, believe that with your mind. But these two units are clashing, so you hit your fighting roll, you get your degrees of success, you compare to the defense of the opponent, and then you throw your damage at him, he absorbs with his armor, and he takes some injury perhaps. So with the Song of Ice and Fire system, you continue that until the point where they hit the 0 hit points, which is just what they do in their regular combat. And usually in regular combat, when they take anything beyond 0 hit points, they'd have to take a wound, which is a long-lasting injury. But in this system, once they hit 0 and they take anything beyond that, the morale is shattered. And the commander has to roll a test to try to keep them together. Hold it together, boys. And if he fails that, then they scatter, and the unit proceeds in a random direction, under the control of the GM, and or disperses. If it fails very badly, or if it's very badly injured, it disperses. And when that happens, a certain percentage of the men who made up that unit die at that point. You don't track the deaths and the wounds of individual people during the battle, because it's tedious. You track it when that unit is removed, or when the whole battle is over. You can track it then, when you have time, when you're not taking away from the narrative, the flow and experience of the game. So this, it's a really good system because you already know the mechanic, because it's the same as your one-on-one combat mechanic. And then when you hit that bottom, and your commander becomes important, although he's important in regular combat as well, but we'll come back to that. And all the accounting that's gonna get in the way and slow down the fight is put off to the end. So that's good too. So let's talk about how else the commander, the leader, is important. So the commander issues the orders to his unit, and there are two skills in Game of Thrones that help him do that. There's his command skill, and there's also his strategy, or maybe tactics. I think it's tactics in that case. But basically his tactics determine kind of the initiative. That's his combat initiative. And so who goes first, basically. And you can use it for other things as well, but that's the main reason. And his command, the better a commander he is, the better he is at leading men or women or satyrs. The better he is at leading, the more orders he can issue. Each unit has a discipline level, so peasants will have no discipline. So you have to roll command against their discipline for them to listen to you. So peasants might not listen to you, whereas trained soldiers are more likely to listen to you. So the higher command, the more likely you are to actually motivate them to do something. But also, the higher your command, the more orders you can issue per turn. This is like more actions per turn that you can take, which is something I love. I love it in regular combat, and I love it in mass combat. But each time you issue an order to the same unit in the same turn, their discipline drops. So the soldiers, if you order them to march on one turn, you'll probably succeed because soldiers are well trained. If you then order them to attack, so now they're doing two actions in one turn. Now they might ignore that, or they might not. So they might actually move and attack in the same turn. And then if you have higher command, you can order them to attack again. But now the mod it's going to be really tough to convince them to do that. They're tired, they're bedraggled, they're put upon by the world, they just were engaged in a clash with the enemy. So the commander is very important. So he's important to direct them, he's important to set the initiative, he's important also when the morale breaks, he's the one who tries to pull it together. And if the commander is killed, then the unit basically is going to not have direction, so they'll follow their last order. Whatever the last order they were given, they'll usually follow that. And also, if their morale breaks, there's no one to save them. Now the way it usually works is the commander usually only really takes damage. He takes damage with the unit. So as the unit's health deteriorates, his health also deteriorates. So that way it's possible for him to die before the rest of the unit, or for the rest of the unit to lose all their health, but he's still fine. So if you're commanding, let's say, peasants, and they're wearing burlap, they're wearing nothing, no armor, but you have full plate on, and so they keep getting smashed and squashed, so their health is dropping and dropping, but your full plate has damage reduction, so you're fine. You don't care that your peasants are dying all around you like animals. So even if their unit is destroyed, if you fail your morale test to keep them together and they flee, and then half of them die effectively, that's when the effect of them dying kicks in. So even if all that happens, you can be perfectly fine. Or it could be the opposite. If your troops are heavily armored and you don't have much armor, you could die well before them. Which again is a really nice system. There are some rules for getting duels and individuals moving through the melee like that. I generally try to stick away from that because realistically, there's not much one man can do in a big battle. Which is why, you know, my player characters are all nobles. They're all commanding units. You know, if I had a couple, and sometimes I do, sometimes I have a couple guys who are down on the battlefield doing something, and they really have no effect on the overall battle. They really don't. So if your PCs do not have effect on the battle, there's no reason to do this level of detail in your mechanics. You can still do it, but the level of detail is not really necessary. So that's how basically, and it's more complicated than that, but that's the basics of how the Game of Thrones system works. So each unit is represented by one troop. They fight. When one of them drops to 0 hit point level, the commander can try to save it with the morale, and if he fails, they scatter. That's when we record the deaths. And as I said, you can bring in those skills during the battle. Get your tactics to work as initiative. Who goes first? Get your command to get extra actions. Get your command to get them to follow your actions well. You know, we'll come back to Rogue Trader. In Rogue Trader, you have 2 capital ships, really big ships, 3 miles long, 10,000 people per ship, fighting each other, blasting each other with artillery, and giant lasers, and starfighters. Really exciting, really fun. But in that system, every point of damage that your ship takes drops your crew morale by the same amount. If you take 10 damage, you've lost 10 morale. And it's basically on a percentile system. Your morale starts at 100%, usually, not always, but usually, and can drop down from there. And as you start to hit certain tiers of morale, like 75% morale, 50%, 25%, things start to happen. You know, like you start getting penalties, basically, because the crew's not happy. They'll start to mutiny eventually as well. Not during combat, though. Usually, the GM could, I suppose, have a mutiny during combat. But this basically is a mass combat. You've got the ships fighting each other, which is awesome. But you've also got all the men commanding the different systems. You got your engineers running the engines. You got your gunners firing the guns. You got your pilots flying starfighters. You got, of course, your helmsman driving the ship. Your sensors officer trying to detect weak points in the enemy movement. Got communications officer trying to jam the comm of the other ships. It's basically mass combat, just a different style. So here again, though, some of that command comes into play. The captain can boost the morale even if the hit points are not there. He has several abilities that can either give bonuses to the whole ship or to specific parts of the crew, or to just restore morale over the whole ship. So he's got a whole bunch of things. Also, the ship's surgeon and doctor become important because they can do triage and keep people from dying. And that will restore health to your ship, basically, but it also restores morale. And that's an abstraction. It's more complicated than that as well, but that's the basics. So the ships fight with their stat blocks, but you have these stats. You have the morale, which drops, and then the commander can provide bonuses to actions or to morale. And that's basically it in a nutshell. It is much more complicated than that, but for all your crunchy goodness. But those are the basics of that system. And the homebrew, I'll go over that homebrew system I used for Pathfinder. It was really simple. It was each unit had hit points equal to the number of people in that unit, or troops in that unit, or monsters in that unit. And each one did a certain amount of damage whenever they attacked, and then that was pretty much it. And then so if you have 1,000 orcs versus 10 dwarfs, we might say the orcs do 1 point of damage. They kill 1 dwarf every time they attack. Whereas or you could do it as a dice as well. They could kill a d10 dwarfs. Whereas the dwarfs might kill 10 orcs every time they attack. Or it might be, 5d10 or whatever you're doing. And so they kind of wear each other down, just like that. Now you're tracking the population of the group as a whole during the battle, but it's still pretty quick, which you have to keep it quick, in my opinion. You don't want it to bog down too much. You could even give them some form of damage reduction. Especially the dwarfs, they're all wearing full plate. I could see some damage reduction, or the orcs not having any armor, they probably wouldn't get any. But maybe then you boost the orc damage a little. So it's pretty easy to homebrew a system into place, and then track just each unit type. So in one battle, I had on one side like airships and regular ships and wizards on flying carpets, and we had Pegasus Knights as well. And then the other side, we had like druids riding humpback whales and lizard men on pterodactyls, and we had island elves on giant eagles. So let's say that's the battle. We've got 4 unit types here, 3 unit types here. So we're just tracking the amount of people or troops in that. They each have their own little mod. Each one can attack a different type every turn. It's almost like Final Fantasy style. The actual maneuvering, not super important mechanically in that case. You're not moving the units individually. They can just attack anyone they want. Which is very, simple, it's fast. You don't need a battle grid or a map or anything. So for our purposes at the time, it worked very well. And the great thing about that is it abstracts in things like magic. The Game of Thrones system doesn't deal well with magic because there isn't any in that setting, really. So by abstracting it more, we can say, well, the wizards have fireballs and poison gas clouds, and they can summon earth elementals or water elementals, perhaps in this case. But we'll just abstract that. We'll just say that means they kill like 5d10 of whatever they're attacking. So if they're attacking the druids on humpback whales, maybe the druids on humpback whales have I'll give them damage reduction of like 10 because whales are hard to kill, and because the druids might have like stone skin, or they might have shape shifted into something like crabs, maybe crabs riding whales into battle, giant crabs. So now they can attack each other. The rules are not complicated. It's very abstract, but we can describe all these really wonky, crazy, high magic effects without getting bogged down, rolling each save and doing each thing. And then again, individual characters want much leeway to attack the whole unit. But if you wanted to, you could certainly get into it with using, like, if a single wizard had a fireball effect, you could certainly abstract that forward and maybe bring the Game of Thrones system in and say, well, this fireball on average does 10 damage, and on average these peasants have less than 10 hit points, so every fireball he throws with that radius, we'll say he would probably kill like 20 peasants if he's attacking the peasants. So that's pretty easy kind of thing to calculate out. Now the thing is, you just have to make sure it all lines up. So if your troop counts are 1,000 peasants and 100 wizards, if they can fireball, if these wizards can fireball, it should quickly become apparent those peasants are not going to do well. So in that case, your mass combat rules and your real skirmish rules or single character rules have to line up pretty well. Or because if the rule sets don't line up well, then the individuals have a disproportionate power compared to the actual mass combat rules, and that's not good because it doesn't make sense, and they'll notice it doesn't make sense. But if you are having individuals move around, I try to keep it pretty close to like duels. So we'll have they might be running around in a big battle and with some orcs, and maybe they're moving through and they're killing an orc every attack. They might kill an orc if they're really powerful and the orcs are really naked. But then we get a troll in there, and we'll run a little skirmish with the troll, perhaps. And that can be entertaining, can be a fun scene. It doesn't necessarily impact the bigger picture, because they might take 5 rounds to kill a troll, but maybe there's 100 trolls. If you zoom out, look at the whole battle, there's 100 trolls. So it was hard to kill one troll, yes, but it didn't have that big of an effect, even though it was difficult. So it really depends on your party, what rule set you want to use. It depends on your party. If they're commanders, you can use fairly detailed rules. If they're plebes and they're just fighting in the army, you probably don't need detailed rules. And if they're somewhere in between, if they're like powerful priests or a superhero in a World War II game, perhaps, then you need to make sure, and that's the most difficult mode, because you need to make sure your individual character combat and your mass combat mesh and they come together. So that's pretty much all I got to say about mass combat. Those are my experiences mechanically. I love mass combat for the cinematic style, for the power of the PCs, this leadership ability, having all these people following them, and just it starts to deal with governments, and I love exploring government concepts in my games, especially space opera, because you can, like Star Trek has shown us, you can do a lot of fun stuff with real-world constructs, but just change it just enough so the stereotypes are gone. But anyway, let me know what you think, what mechanics you like for mass combat, what's fast, what's furious, what's fun, how you do it. Let me know, because as I said, I've only really used those 3 methods, and they've worked very well, but I'm always looking for something new, always looking for to level up my game, get more experience points in real life. I'm going to sign out now. I hope everybody has a good day. Cheers.